Good afternoon, everyone. So it's already 1:31, but people are still coming in. So maybe we can allot about 2 to 3 minutes more so that we can maximize the number of participants. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So, we're now 48 in the room. We're expecting a bit more, no? But maybe people will still come in a bit later. And of course, if you're in UP Baguio, I'm sure we're aware that there are also other activities going on at the moment. So baka medyo nahati ang ating audience. But in any case, we're actually 47 in the room. So magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Magandang hapon. And based on the registration information, marami tayong, kumbaga, we have students from UP Baguio, faculty as well from UP Baguio, but based on the registration data, mukhang meron din tayong from, of course, outside Luzon. Ayan, no? So maybe just let's do a let's just check on our the profile of our participants this afternoon. Ilan dito ang, sabihin na lang natin by Luzon, Visayas at Mindanao para lang may feel tayo kung merong outside Luzon nga. So, from Luzon, pwede bang pa-heart reaction? Ayan, okay. So, I'm receiving something like 19, 20, okay, 20 heart reactions. Ayan. So, hello sa mga taga Luzon. Baka karamihan din ay malapit din sa Baguio. Alright? Okay. And let's see. How about, meron bang nasa Visayas area? Coming from the Visayas? Meron ba? Okay. Heart reaction nga din para mabilang ko kung meron from Visayas. Alright, mukhang wala. Pero Mindanao, ayan, meron bang from Mindanao sa ating audience, sa ating virtual room? Okay. Outside the Philippines, meron po ba? Let's find out. Is there somebody in the room from, yes, we have one, two, okay. All right. So thank you once again for joining us this afternoon. We have our speaker today prepared something like 1 hour lecture. We will have time for Q&A. So if in case you have any question, even early on during the lecture, please make sure that maybe you can type it already in the chat box so we can monitor your question. All right. Okay, sige. All right. So let's formally begin this session. Right. So let me of course introduce myself. I am Rosel Balmores Paulino. I'm also a faculty in the College of Social Science in the University of the Philippines, Baguio. Currently, I am also the coordinator of our Indigenous Studies program, where we are actually offering a Ph.D. in Indigenous Studies. Right. So this session, of course, is in relation to the celebration of IP Month or Indigenous Peoples Month. So pursuant to Presidential Proclamation number 1906, the month of October is declared as the National Indigenous Peoples Month in recognition and protection of the rights of indigenous cultural communities. The month of October is declared therefore as the month of people's participation in the celebration and preservation of indigenous cultural communities as part of the life of the nation. And for just to recall, this declaration was actually signed 14 years ago on October 5, 2009. Right. In light of this, the Ph.D. Indigenous Studies program, the College of Social Sciences, and the College of Arts and Communication proudly present another lecture under the Indigenous Studies Lecture Series. This lecture is titled Mobilizing Indigeneity in Diaspora, with Associate Professor Ruth M. Tindaan of the Department of Language, Literature, and the Arts of the College of Arts and Communication as our speaker. Right. So let me now, of course, formally introduce our speaker. Dr. Ruth M. Tindaan is Associate Professor of English at the Department of Language, Literature, and the Arts, College of Arts and Communication, University of the Philippines, Baguio. She earned her Ph.D. in Cultural Studies from Goldsmiths, University of London. Her research interests include the representation of indigenous peoples in media and literature, indigenous peoples in the diaspora, and indigenous language documentation. She served the university as chairperson of the Department of Language, Literature, and the Arts, as college secretary of the College of Arts and Communication, and as director of the Cordillera Studies Center. So friends, students, colleagues, please join me in welcoming Dr. Ruth Tindaan.
Hello, good afternoon. Is the audio coming in okay? Okay ba? Yeah, okay. So good afternoon and thank you for choosing to spend the time with us this afternoon. So I'm going to share my slide. All right. So I hope it's okay that I don't do the big screen so that I can see the slides coming up. Okay. So yung lecture natin this afternoon, the conversation will revolve around the idea of mobilizing indigeneity in diaspora. So this is how I plan to go about our conversation this afternoon. So first, I'd like to talk about yung tatlong terms sa ating title, yung indigeneity, diaspora, and mobilization, because these concepts will have some, this will figure in the discussion. So siguro maganda rin na may discussion tayo. Ano ba yung mga concepts na ito? Since I think most of the participants are students, so maybe we'll take away some discussion dun sa concepts na ito. And then we'll move on sa aking research na share ko sa inyo this afternoon. So it's about the diasporic Igorots in the UK. I'm going to talk a bit about the research field and data gathering because somehow maybe some students who are here are interested in the methods aspect of doing research. So perhaps you can pick up some things about methods in this part. And then number three, we'll have now the presentation of some of the data that I gathered from the research. We'll have two of those, so I call them the creative mobilization. So we're going to look at ritual performance and social media. And then I attempt to present the conceptual or analytical concept that I developed out of this project, which I call reconstructive indigeneity. So I'm going to talk about what this is and how you might use it in your own project as an analytical concept. Or maybe you can contest or modify or reject it altogether. And then as a conclusion, I'm going to talk about what then are the possible implications of the findings of this project in the practice of indigenous studies. Yeah. Okay, so I'll begin with the idea of indigeneity. So when we talk about indigeneity, we usually associate this concept with the following. So ang una dito, yung tinatawag natin na temporal precedence or the idea of priority in time with respect to the occupation and use of a specific territory. So it's priority in time, temporal precedence, and territoriality. So you have two aspects. So it's precedence in time. Kaya when we talk about indigenous peoples, we talk about them in relation to residence in an ancestral domain from time immemorial. Yeah, so yun yung usually associated sa indigeneity. And then we also associate indigeneity with voluntary perpetuation of cultural distinctiveness. So this has to do with language, culture, aspects of culture, and these are distinct to a particular group. We also have self-identification and identification or recognition of your identity as a distinct group by the authorities and that you are a distinct collectivity. And finally, you have, of course, we're all familiar with this, the very long history of indigenous people subjugation, marginalization, dispossession, discrimination, or exclusion. And I think the lectures throughout this October on campus and elsewhere, there's a lot of illustration about this historical experience, not only for indigenous peoples in the Philippines, but also I think this is a common experience among indigenous peoples around the world because of, let's say, development, aggression, militarization, and so many other causes of dispossession and discrimination. Okay. Now we're moving on to diaspora. Ano naman tong diaspora? Um, Originally, the concept of diaspora was concerned with studying or understanding the dispersal of people, which is due to parang, traumatic experience, or they were forcibly dispersed as a people. And when you think of this, usually they call this the victim tradition of diaspora, or the classical diaspora tradition. And usually we associate this with the experience of the Jewish diaspora. So, di ba, I think if you're a Christian, you would know the history of the Jewish people. They were enslaved by the Egyptians, and then later on uh, they were captives of the Babylonian Empire. So Nebuchadnezzar, ba enslaved them, ganyan. So if you are familiar with the song by the rivers of Babylon, do you know this song, like this, like dancey tune? Sometimes it's being used for line dancing a lot. Yeah, but the story there is, of course, that one, the captivity of the Jewish people in Babylon, and that is the traumatic experience which remains in the collective memory of the Jewish people. And therefore, they were dispersed, di ba, they were displaced from the promised land, which was supposedly promised to them by Moses. So they were dispersed and they went to so many other places. So what are the characteristics of a diasporic group based on this victim tradition? Salience of the homeland. So yon, because of their forcible dispersal, na-displace sila from their homeland in such a very difficult manner, then they remember that in their collective memory. And because of that, they are committed to maintaining or restoring their original homeland. They continue their relationship with their homeland, and they actually think that they may return to their homeland when conditions become favorable later. So there's this continuing relationship with the homeland because of that experience. Of course, apart from the Jewish, we can also think about the African diaspora, the Africans who were enslaved, and they were transported to the Americas to serve the labor demands of the plantations. Yeah, so they were brought to the Americas for that purpose. So again, a traumatic experience kasi forcible yung kanilang removal from their homeland. We can also think about the Armenian diaspora. So the Armenians, parang they experience genocide from the Turks, and this is an example of what we call now ethnic cleansing, because there's a one particular group, they don't want the people who are different from them to be part of the nation, for example, or their country. So they massacre them, things like that. So yeah, those are the mga victim tradition ng diasporic group. Um, but because of developments, some of the diaspora scholars, they wanted to, I think, to rethink this victim tradition. So some of them, they actually now looked at other phenomena, and they realized that not all diasporic groups will actually have that kind of victim tradition. Hindi sila, they cannot be classified in that sense. So they now talk about the idea of what we call non-victim diasporas. So because the people who move or who migrate actually disperse, or they move from their homeland, not necessarily in a similar experience as the victim diasporas, but through a combination of compelled and voluntary elements. So, for example, it's compelled because maybe in your country you don't have a lot of opportunities, like economic opportunities. Let's say there's poverty, so that's sort of you're compelled to move. but also there's a voluntary element to it, because there is like it's your decision to move out of that situation. So compared to the victim diasporas, talagang they were forcibly dispersed. So they now talk about the idea of, a labor diaspora or a trade diaspora. And the thing about the the movement to the non-victim diasporas as a concept is that, with the victim tradition, the scholars think that it's the victimhood that is being emphasized. But with the non-victim diasporas, you are now looking at, or you're analyzing these diasporic groups, not according to the victimhood idea, but you're also looking at how you're accounting for how they are being creative and productive in their lives, in their displacement. So I think they're calling attention to what we call the agency of groups when they move to another place. And yeah, I think this was I was saying, they when they move to another place, they're actually exercising agency, and then they mobilize, they organize, and they actually also do a lot of activities, initiatives and such things, in order for them to function and to live in this in their places of destination. And they're looking at this, they're doing all this mobilization because of their bonds with their fellow members, according to language, religion. So they have this shared belonging. That's why they're making this sort of networking practices. And on the other hand, the idea of homeland orientation, kasi nga sabi natin, feature of diasporas is you have that strong homeland orientation. You're always thinking about your relationship with the land that you left behind. But this was criticized because of its dependence on the idea of fixed origins. So why is the idea of fixed origins something which is objectionable? Of course, you might recognize that this is part of the general movement in relation to, let's say, the post-structuralist or post-colonial understanding of identity not being pinned on what we call essentialist values, like the idea of fixed origins. So there are some scholars who try to engage in this, criticizing the idea of, let's not the idea of homeland orientation. So I just going to give some examples of those who mounted some critique as example, because you might use this in your own project. So one of those scholars is Indian scholar Avtar Bra, and she proposed the idea of homing desire. Yeah. So, what does she mean by this? So, sabi niya, the idea of homing desire is not the same as a desire for the homeland. So, you see, she's trying to unpin the idea of, not fixing it to the idea of a fixed origin, which is the homeland. So what she's saying is this is a homing desire, but it's not the same as desire for a homeland. And she reconstitutes the idea of home, because originally, of course, when you think of homeland or homeland orientation, you think of a geographical home that is in your memory and you're maintaining your relationship with. For Bra, on the other hand, she says, no, let's rethink the idea of home. The idea of home may now be actually not a single specific geographical place, but could be the following. So, bedding the place of origin, maybe the place of settlement, a local or transnational place, perhaps an imagined virtual community, or a matrix of known experiences and intimate social relations. So if you see her intervention, she's actually coming in because of new developments now in our contemporary world, where you have mobility, and then the new developments in communication technology. For example, she's referring here to imagine virtual communities, which of course are enabled by advances in communication technologies. So her intervention is coming from that particular context. So um, the result of her intervention are this, we now think, or at least from her development of this concept of homing desire, we're now looking at homemaking as an active process that's part of the circumstances of one particular diasporic group, and it's something which is contingent on the experiences or conditions of this group, rather than it being necessarily oriented to the homeland or place left behind. And so with brass intervention, the idea of homeland orientation is now understood as, not an actual return, but it's a vicarious relationship, or intermittent visits to the place of origin, not really actually returning to your place of origin. But the results, so there's a lot more discussion on this, but there's no time to talk about all the engagements there of the scholars who are thinking about the idea of diaspora. But finally, we come to the three elements that remain to be understood as the concepts that constitute a diaspora. So, of course, there's dispersion, there's the homeland orientation, and there's boundary maintenance. So all these are the elements that will characterize a particular diasporic group. Okay, so we can see this in the case of the Igorots in the UK later. The third concept in our title is mobilization. So this is the last one. And I'd like to use the way in which Sockfield explained the idea of mobilization. So he says this is he says that when people move abroad, for example, they do not actually, it's not automatic that they will cohere immediately just because they're coming from one particular place of origin. So there's a need for them. It requires mobilization. So what's mobilization? It's the idea of, you need to organize, you have activities together, and you're doing things together for a particular reason. So, so it's not an automatic quality that just because you go abroad and then you uh, identify with your original identity from your homeland, because probably you want to be assimilated in the new country and you want to disappear into the identity of your place of destination and not affirm anymore your original identity. So the idea of mobilization is organizing, acting, you exercising your agency, doing things. That's the idea of Sockville in relation to activating your identity. So he says that in order for diasporas to be so, then they have this mobilization. So they're using opportunity structures. So they're using, for example, advanced means of communication to interact and to do things in relation to their community. And then they have what he calls mobilizing practices. So meron silang mga associations, organizations, and then they have their way of imagining their homeland or their relationship with each other. So you have, for example, ways of imagining that, like the idea of allusions to roots and home, and then of course this will connect to memory and imagination or collective memory of the group, and this will enable this group to mobilize and to act in relation to their identity. So ito yung kanyang idea ng mobilization. Okay? So since we're through doon sa ating tatlong concepts, I just want to go to this idea that usually indigeneity and diaspora as concepts, they are usually not or I mean, they are usually thought to be opposites or parang they are contrast, ganyan. Kasi when you look at indigeneity, it's talking about like the features that I discussed earlier. It's talking about dwelling or residence or rootedness or spatial attachment to a specific geographical place, di ba? So yun yung kanyang features or yung kanyang meaning as a concept. So it's the idea of attachment to a territory. On the other hand, when you're talking about diaspora, it's about traveling, it's about mobility, movement. It's talking about roots. It's talking about displacement. So it's talking about being off the land. You're off the land, but you are off the land while you're not living there anymore. So you see the sort of like contrast. So a lot of people or a lot of scholars will say they don't have anything to do with each other kasi they're talking to different sort of contrasting concepts. But our attempt this afternoon is to show perhaps that the concept of indigeneity and diaspora may not be as conceptual opposites as usually thought in this manner. Probably there are some things we can harness the potential of indigeneity as a concept, diaspora as a concept, to understand the contemporary situations of migrant indigenous peoples, like the Igorots in the UK, with whom I worked with when I did this particular project. Okay, so there were actually attempts to do that, to try and harness the potentials of indigeneity and diaspora's concepts to understand contemporary conditions. So one attempt is done by Mark Watson with his idea or concept he proposed, yung tinatawag nating diasporic indigeneity. So nakita nyo na kinonect niya yung dalawa na sabi natin kanina, parang apparently these are conceptual opposites, but he does that. His work, this concept, his work is based on the work he did with the Ainu of Japan. Of course, the Ainu, they're also parang they went through a lot of discrimination and bad treatment from the Japanese majority and the Japanese state. But Mark Watson developed this concept. Ito yung sinasabi niya, no? It refers to this adaptive and innovative collective measures that will show the extension and development of identities in urban areas, because the Ainu, their original homeland is of course Hokkaido Island, but some of them, just like other indigenous peoples, they're moving to the urban areas like Tokyo, and instead of them disappearing there or abandoning their identity as Ainu because of the huge pressure of discrimination and all other problems in relation to you being different, they actually do not do that, and they have all these responses, which Mark Watson calls a diasporic indigeneity. So that's one of the uh, attempts to develop this kind of trying to put together the conceptual powers of the concept of diaspora and indigeneity. Another one is by James Clifford. So he comes up with this idea of what he calls indigenous articulations. And I think if you're familiar with cultural studies theory, then you will recognize that this is inspired by the theory of articulation by Stuart Hall, which I think I will be able to explain more quickly by using this analogy. So, which Stuart Hall, of course, uses. He uses the idea of an articulated lorry. So, lorry ang tawag nila dito. We call it a truck, but in UK they call it a lorry. And what is the connection of this lorry with the idea of indigenous articulation? So, if you have a lorry, diba, it has a cab like this one in front, and then yung nasa likod niya, the one that carries the cargo, you can actually remove it at any time. You can replace it with something else, maybe something that will accommodate the amount of cargo that you need to move. you can actually modify the makeup of the lorry according to the demands of the job that has to be done. So that is the kind of idea that James Clifford adopts, in this idea of indigenous articulation. So he explains that for indigenous peoples, especially in contemporary times, there's actually this kind of contingency. You like a lorry, you can actually connect, disconnect, you can change, you can modify, you can innovate, because of the circumstances that you are responding to. So I think the famous phrase of Stuart Hall is, um, meaning without guarantees. There's no permanence to the strategies that indigenous peoples take because of also the endless kind of changes in the maybe the powers that be that they are dealing with. So they have to be uh, adaptive, they have to be ingenious, and they have to change a lot of things in a lot of ways because they need to respond. So that's the idea of indigenous articulation. So now the attempt that I'm trying to do later on when I'm going to talk about the idea of reconstructive indigeneity, which I said earlier, developed from this project, is to try and participate in this attempt of scholars to also understand um, indigeneity in contemporary world. So yeah, that's the aspiration to engage with these earlier scholars who've been doing all this work all together. Okay, so tapos na ako I'm done with my preliminaries. So we're moving on now to the actual research that I did in the UK with the diasporic Igorots. And I'll start with this. This is their logo. So it's an organization. So if you remember earlier when I talked about Sock Field with the mobilization, you will see, and he talks about the mga uh, how do diasporic groups mobilize, and he talks about opportunity structures, he talks about yung mga uh, how they exercise their agency. So you'd see here immediately that with the existence or the presence of an organization for immigrants in the UK, so they move there. There's already that kind of intention for mobilization because there's an organization that they form. So this is how they imagine this organization with their logo. So you will see, of course, the use of the textiles, the material culture in the Cordy to imagine that kind of how do they use this? They're using this as representation of their organization. You will see, for example, in this image, this is an induction program back in 2013. And you will see in this photo, these are the officers, that the representation is made by the attire. So for example, if you recognize the attires, you'd know where these officers come from. So for example, these ladies here, these gentlemen here are from Mountain Province, and then the ladies here, so right side of your screen, are from Benguet, and then these ladies here towards the middle, these are from Mountain Province. So you can see that they're using this, shall we say, material culture, these attires, as part of the mobilizing idea. So they're in this representation, for example, you can see that the idea of the organization is they're imagining their community as Igorots. Yeah, that's the identity that they affirm. But it is made up of all these multiple or various um, ethno-linguistic groups in the Cordillera, but they're seeing there's a particular kind of collectivity to it, even if it's made up of differences. Yeah, so that's how they're imagining that kind of organization. This one, of course, shows the place of tawag doon, of course there's dispersed sa UK, and this is the London area. So these are they call them boroughs, but I think the translation is barangays. So you see that there's a place of concentration up here in northeast London, in the borough of Waltham Forest, the one with the red mark on this blank map. So this concentration of them here, but they're also dispersed in the other boroughs. So it's not only in this borough of Waltham Forest. There's many of them there because the first arrivals, this is where they were initially employed, and then later on they bought properties here. So this has become an area of concentration. But there are other uh, there are other residences or other places where they work and reside. So they're dispersed dito sa area, sa London area. So now I'll talk about the data gathering method because, as I said earlier, maybe your interest has to do with the methods aspect of doing research. When we talk about diasporic groups like this Igorots in the UK, uh, in terms of method, there's this concept of what we call the double-ended study. And it's necessary to do that because of this idea that diasporic groups, they are keeping their feet in both worlds. So the other foot is in the Cordillera, for example, that's the homeland. And then the other foot is in the UK. So they're this. So when you study them or you do a research about their life or their experience, then you cannot just look at the one foot, the one which is in the UK. You have to look at the both feet, di ba? So you have to do this what you call a double-ended study. So you understand the diasporic lives abroad through their ties to home, because there is this ano to, continuing or a continuous um, dimension of sociality between these two worlds, where the diasporic groups, they will have a 1 feet each, 1 foot each doon sa place na ito. So there's no way you can understand that by just looking at one. So you have to do this kind of double-ended study. So that's the thing that I had to do. So I had to do your field work will have to be both in the UK and in the Philippines, where these migrants come from, their original home. Also, the thing with studying diasporic groups is the idea of, let's say, in our conventional participant observation. So if you have a project and you want to do language studies, for example, and you want to go to a particular place to where you gather the data, and you say, for example, your field site is, for example, my hometown sa Bugyas, Benguet. So sabihin mo, I'm going to Bugyas, Benguet. So you travel there, you get the necessary permissions, you go, and then you do your data gathering, because you can find Bugyas, Benguet there. It's there, and you go there as the researcher. Yeah, but in working with diasporic people, it's not as straightforward as something like that, because there is no, you cannot say where are the Igorots in the UK. Of course, you know that they are in these places. They are dispersed. So there is no one bounded, straightforward place that you're going in order to gather your data. So sabi nga dito, there's no one clearly demarcated community where you can go and gather your data, because they are dispersed across. So how are you going to manage that kind of field site as a researcher? So what I had to do is what we call, yun nga, you need to construct the field, because there is no one geographic place that you can go to. So you have to have this particular kind of constructing the field according to Amit, and what does it mean? Then you have to find ways in which you can do the contacts in different relationships and different connections in order for you to see that that is the field. So if I'm going back to the picture sa ating slide, our title slide, this is how you know that there is a community, because there is the presence of the people, and you cannot find this in the geographical area because they are dispersed. So this is the only time that you can know that there is a community with the sort of aspect of performativity to it. Yeah, so you have to see this kind of sort of corporeal uh, performance of their community, so that you will know na, yeah, there's a community, kasi you can see that there is no community outside these performances. So as a researcher, you get to follow these kinds of activities that they're doing. So what are they doing? They're doing festivals, they're doing group trips together, they're doing sports competitions, they're doing all these kinds of social activities together. So these are the things that you need to follow. Ito yung field mo, not a specific geographical place that you can find. So some of their activities, for example, they do their festivals. So you will recognize that these are the similar or the same festivals that are being done in the home region in the Cordillera. So for example, you have the Adivay of Benguet, the Langay of Montay Province, Gotad of Ifugao, and Ulalim of Kalinga. So they have a version of this, and they schedule this festival simultaneously with the ones being done in the home region. Yeah, so these are their activities, and these are the provincial members of the organization. So I'm just going to show you very quickly yung kanilang mga activities, and then I'm going to talk about them. So for example, this one, they do a Grand Canyao, usually September, and they use this to celebrate the founding anniversary of their organization. So you'd see, of course, that this is a repurposing of the indigenous practice of a kanyao. Kanyao is it's a ritual in the Cordillera, and they're using that to do this commemoration of it's like an anniversary celebration of their organization, the founding of their organization. And you see that they're doing all these sorts of rituals. For example, here, so they got the parang materials from back home. Some of them were used in actual rituals in their hometown, and they're using it to do their own rituals in the UK. And yeah, there's all these kinds of performances, rituals, these dances, this singing, this for example, this one is a wedding ritual, and then all sorts of performances going on. Rituals here again. And I want to call your attention to, for example, you might have noticed already the sort of improvised quality to the performance of the ritual. So there's a degree of improvisation going on in the performance of the ritual. So for example, here you'll see an improvised pig dito sa right side natin ng screen. And here, well, they didn't have the jar, for the rice wine for the ritual. So for now, in this particular ritual performance, they're using a tumbler here. And then here you see like pig, kasi diba in a ritual it requires animal sacrifice. So somebody took the time, off from work to actually create this pig like uh, you know uh, it's a representation of the actual animal that is sacrificed in the actual ritual at home. So somebody did that, invested time and effort and talent to do something like this, and it's for the performance of this ritual in their program, there. So how do we make sense? So when I participated in all these ritual performances and activities of the organization, then you have to make sense of that. So why are they doing it? There's so much resource invested, so time, money, talents invested for the performance of these rituals. And so you have to wonder, you need to understand this. Why are they doing it? What is it for? What's the function? And you find the sort of explanation in relation to what Hallbox would call collective frameworks of memory. So if this is like memory that is reconstructed by the members, and they are remembering this, we are reconstructing these rituals in light of their present circumstances as migrants in the UK. And also, one way of understanding these performances of rituals has to do with ito, sinasabi ni Fortier, and it is a set of collectively remembered practices. So these performances are remembrances of how the rituals were done in the home region, in the Cordillera. And these are done every year. So it's a repetitive kind of act that they're doing every time. And so what is the function of that? Is this one, it now produces, because of this idea of repetition always being done, uh, performed, then it somehow, because of that, sort of repetition being done every year, it now produces what she calls the imaginary effect of an internal ethnic essence. And this is transmitted through the stylized acts of transfer to the younger generation. So these particular kinds of rituals, they now become because of they are annual rituals, they now become the structure of experience for the members, especially the younger ones, those who were born there and didn't experience these rituals in the home region anymore. So this is their experience of these rituals that will structure their memory of what these experiences are about. And it also produces a kind of stability for the group, for the community, and this particular kinds of collective memory performed repetitively will act as that which will hold the community together. So it's like a glue. It's the one that holds them together as an organization or as a group of people. Okay, I'm done with that. So I'm moving on with the social media. Okay, so we're done with the ritual performances, and I'm moving on now to social media activities. Just one example of it, and we'll see again what we can say about these particular activities. So in the practice of course, when I did the data gathering, I also included yung activities sa social media, because that is also an important um, portal or parang platform where they do their mobilizing. So I included it in my data gathering, not only in participant observation or interviews, but also what we call now nethnography, like doing ethnography online. Okay, so I observed that in their social media, so of course I requested to be part of the Facebook group, and I noticed this particular kind of activity, no? So kapag ka may Grand Canyaw or there's this yung mga rituals na sinabi ko kanina, you notice that they actually post mga invitation, mga invitation for you, we have this activity, and these are the details. So I'm just going to show you the range of this invitation. So it was for specifically for the 2016 Grand Canyaw. So there's this range of them. So you see this one. So I'll show you first, and then we'll talk about them later. So there's this one, also this, and this one, that. Yeah, yon. So of course you will notice every time I present this one, I get a parang chuckle. Parang may it's like amusing. The people are amused by this, and maybe it's interesting to point out why it causes a chuckle, or why it invites that kind of response. So of course, I'm sure that you will notice that this is the landscape of the place of destination. This is the UK. So you have all the parang landmarks here. So you have Tower Bridge and the Thames River. Okay, but you see there the mode of transportation from Tuba Itogon. So that's from Benguet, and it's a jeepney arriving. The same thing, you have a jeep from Lubuagan, Kalinga, which is overloaded. May mga nakatop load. Then, of course, this one is the Dangwa bus, which was a prominent means of transport in the Cordillera for a long time. But in this particular image, it's bound to Kapangan, Benguet. And this one, you'd recognize if you're from Mountain Province, this is the bus that you take to go to your place, especially Bontok. This is for Sagada GL Trans. Okay, so how can we make sense of this? So again, if you're a researcher, you have to make sense of what you encounter and how do you analyze them? What is your tool for understanding these activities, these images that are produced by the community that you're studying? So, syempre, you have to think and look up kung ano yung mga possible or appropriate tools that you can use. So out of the trying to figure out what this means, then I came out with the tool which is called the social semiotics. So this is like a method of interpretation, a method of uh, interpreting imagery, for example, like this ones. And it is a particular kind of method to read meaning production or meaning making in social practices. So in this particular instance, yeah, so because you need to understand what this means or what is it that they're trying to do here, what is it that they're trying to convey. Kasi when you do invitations, 'di ba? All you need to do is where's the venue, what's the time, what is the event, and probably how to get there. Those are the crucial information that you need to put in the invitation. But if you look at these invitations, there's more than that. Why have they assembled these images in this manner? So you'd suspect that there is a particular kind of message that they want to convey. There's a particular kind of narrative that they're trying to develop. They're trying to express in these invitations and to circulate kasi nga these are posted in social media, so you'd imagine that they'd expect that it's not only the Igorots in the UK who will see these ones but also other people who are part of their network. So, what is our interpretation of these images? Of course, you'd have to do the unpacking, as of course is required by social semiotics. So you say, there's what are the images that are there? So you have vehicles, very central images in these invitations. And then of course you have to think vehicles, what do they convey? So movement, mobility, travel, ganyan. Of course you'll also notice the incongruity of elements, and I think this is where the chuckle comes from. Because for example, when you see this one, you have the landscape, the UK landscape, and then suddenly there's a strange element, which is from the Philippines or from the Cordillera. So there's a sort of incongruity going on. And of course, you have to notice that these images, they involve image manipulation software, which of course were learned by the Igorots in the UK how to do that, and then they were shared in the mechanism of the social media. So you'll think of this as what Sockfield was talking about earlier, as the opportunity structures and the means for mobilization that are used by the diasporic groups in order for them to mobilize. So you're seeing this as the opportunity structures for this to happen. Okay, so what's the interpretation of these images that I just shown you? you'd see that, of course, because these were posted on Facebook, no, so maraming mga comments, there's a lot of interactions, exchanges among not only the Igorots in the UK themselves, but also other Igorots around the world, so in the Philippines and in other countries where there are Igorots. So there's this a lot of exchanges going on, and because social semiotics says earlier that you have to look at the signifying practices, you're not only going to look at the images themselves, but you have to also look at the interactions that were, that are going on around these particular images, because that's going to be part of the meaning production process. So you'd have to look at what they're saying, what are their conversations about this particular images. So I had to do that, and came out with this idea that there is a particular sense of what I want to call a collaborative fictioning, between the creators and the consumers. So the creators is Igorot UK, because they're the ones who made this one, and the consumers, yung mga fellow Igorots from different parts of the world or in the home region. And apparently, there's an indication of a mutual desire to construct this sort of possibility where the Igorots from the home region, from the Cordillera, can actually arrive in London or in the landscape of the place of destination through their own modes of transport. And you can see that the exchanges over these invitations, they come from multi directions, multi-directional exchanges. And what am suggesting as interpretation of these images is that there is a particular kind of imagination of their identity as Igorot. I'm saying here Igorotness is mobile. It is vernacular tacking of the adaptive country's landscape, and therefore Igorotness, or their identity as indigenous peoples, they are, it is imaged as a vicarious but deeply felt connection and interaction among all these spatially dispersed Igorots. So that's the interpretation that I'm suggesting for these particular images. Okay, another interesting feature that I've seen in the social media activities is itong practice of they're going to these places in the UK, for example. This is Madame Tussauds. You're familiar with Madame Tussauds in London. It's like a wax museum where they put the parang wax images of famous people. So here, some ladies went there to take photos with the royal family, with wearing their attire. And then here are ladies. They went to Stonehenge, but they made an effort to bring their attires. They changed into this and then take pictures and then post them on Facebook to be seen. And then some of the ladies, they went to Scotland, and then also bringing the attires and changing into them. So it was a very cold winter, but they changed into the dresses to take a photograph against this background. So again, you need to understand what's going on in here. What are they trying to do in this particular stylized photographs that they are posting in their Facebook pages? So again, you need to find a way to interpret what is going on here. So possible way of reading them, again, is what we call your intertextual reading. So the idea of intertextual reading is that the meaning of a particular image, such as this one, might be apprehended by looking at its relationship with other texts or with other images, other documents, perhaps, or other forms of text, which you can locate and try to see if there's a particular layer of meaning that you can get from that related text in order for you to bring out a particular interpretation. So it's a strategy that you can use to read images like this. So you're doing the intertextual reading. So what do you what do you do? Kasi nga, di ba, it says that, perhaps some other texts, this particular images, maybe they are related to other texts, so other images, other photographs, other activities. So you want to look up, how can I relate this to others? So um, you think, may relationship ba ito with other practices? So for example, uh, can you relate this to this? So these are the parang touristic activities of tourists in Baguio, for example, di ba? So when you come to Baguio, you have pictures taken with you wearing the ethnic attires of the indigenous peoples who are here supposedly. Yeah, so you have photographs like this taken of you as a way of like immersing yourself, an experience of the culture of the place where you traveled, and you keep that as a souvenir, right? Okay, so is this somehow related to this one? Is it somehow related? Yeah, perhaps because of the idea of touristing, di ba? The idea of traveling. And when you travel, you actually does something like this. You wear the attire and you want to immerse and experience the culture of a particular place. But so they're somehow related. Yeah. But when you go back to this, you can realize that there is a difference. Kasi nga here, if they are tourists and they're traveling in the UK, then they should be wearing the attires of the people of the place where they are traveling, right? So they should be wearing like Scottish attire or British attire, ganyan, because they are following the touristic discourse, of trying to immerse yourself in the culture of the place where you are going. But here they're not doing that, they're doing a different thing, so it's not consistent with the touristic discourse of immersing yourself in the culture by wearing the attires and taking your photograph. So you'd realize perhaps that they are trying to do something else. It's not the same as the touristic exercise. So if that is different, then what is this about? Why would they be wearing their own attires in their travels, taking the photographs and then posting them in their Facebook pages? So you come up with also another layer of intertext that you can follow is yung mga pictures na ganito. There were, if you're familiar with the history of exhibitions, or I think they're called human zoos, mga exhibitions in the early 20th century, late 19th century, in relation to exhibiting people who have different cultures for the consumption of Europeans and Americans. So, for example, in the UK, you have 1912 Shakespeare's England exhibition in Earl's Court. It's called the Igrote Village. So this is supposed to be it's an exhibition for for English, kasi nga it's about Shakespeare's England. So this was they're trying to exhibit what were accomplished or what were being done, what is the live experience during Shakespeare's time. And then suddenly, why are there Igorots in this particular exhibition? Well, because the organizers actually, they realized that they were not getting a lot of people to come to their Shakespeare's England exhibition. Sabi na, okay, what shall we do? Okay, let's include an exhibition of all these different exotic looking people, and then suddenly the attendance dumami. So it was an attempt to kind of manage the attendance to this exhibition. Yeah, so of course not only England, so you have all these exhibitions in other places in Europe, so and the US. So you have here Paris, for example, and of course there was also one in Belgium and things like that. So how can you relate all this, sabi ko kanina, intertext or related imagery into the interpretation of the material that you're looking at? So I'm suggesting this idea of what Lurie calls prosthetic biography. So it's a kind of, di ba yung prosthetic, yung ginagamit sa movies, for example, so you change the appearance of a person in order for you to achieve a certain character, for example. So this is the idea, that these migrants, they're trying to manipulate their images and trying to construct or to produce a new biography, not only for themselves as individuals, but because they're wearing the attires of particular people, then they're representing a particular people, particular community, and they're trying to produce a different kind of biography for these people. And this is again enabled by the idea of the digital image, which you can actually manipulate. And it's giving them a chance to reinvent themselves in the way that others would like to see them. And here in the pictures, for example, this particular image, then there's a particular kind of association with the royal family and the kind of probably glamour that's associated with that image of the royal family. Yeah, so there's a particular kind of sophistication to them, the particular length of history, they go back in time. So all these kinds of concepts, they are now sort of transferring to them by taking this particular kind of photograph. um but so it's an attempt to like remake your identity into something else in response to those earlier images of the exhibitions of Igorots in the 19th century 20th century exhibitions, which of course, as you will know, produce a lot of negative representations about Igorots being savages, barbaric, backward, etc. So I think this is a particular kind of response to those particular kinds of imagery. Okay. But the thing is, here, of course, they post this to Facebook, they circulate it, maraming nagko-comment, ganyan, etc. Well, for the people, for the members who are doing that, I think it's it's serving the purpose of them trying to work out personal challenges. So, for example, I realized after interviews and interactions that some of the images or the individuals who are in these images, some of them are actually, let's say, undocumented migrants or irregular migrants. Yung wala silang papel. So their idea of creating these images and posting them on Facebook and trying to circulate them is their way of creating a particular kind of semblance of regularity. Kahit na, if you are irregular, then you are invisible because you don't have paper, so you're always afraid, you're precarious of your precarious situation. So when you do something like this, it's as if you're a regular member, you're doing like everyone is doing, you're enjoying your trip. So there's their way of managing that kind of precarious situation. On the other hand, it can be very tricky, or may parang downside to this particular kind of way of representation, because sometimes it turns out to be a mere celebratory. Let's celebrate our identity, celebrate our travels, let's celebrate our being igorot, ganyan. But the idea of visibility can sometimes actually be not equivalent to the idea of empowerment, which is usually sometimes it's being interpreted as like that. I want to say that, just because you are visible doesn't mean that you are automatically empowered or enfranchised. So, for example, the idea of visibility uh, is tricky because sometimes it's not only visibility that you should aspire for, but you should also aspire to be heard rather than only seen by these beautiful photographs. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm moving on to, ito na yung sinasabi ko kanina, this is the attempt to contribute to develop an analytical concept out of this research that I've done and which I'm calling reconstructive indigeneity. So what do I mean by this? I developed this from, of course, you will recognize that it's coming from a sort of medical metaphor. So when you say reconstructive surgery, for example, that means that you're going to do a medical procedure to fix what was damaged in your body, so that you can regain bodily function. So I'm using it in that sense. So I'm using the idea of reconstructive and I refer to the resourceful creative construction and resourceful mobilization of identity by displaced indigenous peoples to manage the challenges caused by displacement. And I'd like to go with the idea of what are these challenges in displacement. So ito yung mga na-experience ng mga displaced people, the ones who move. So there's anxieties of separation, you feel guilty because you're absent, you're a mother, but you're not there to take care of your children. So you have this anxiety. They have this contradictory social mobility. What does that mean? Some of them, they are well educated. They're coming from middle class families. And then suddenly when they go there, they find themselves employed in jobs which are sort of lower than what their credentials are. So it's contradictory because you are working in a menial job like cleaning, caregiving, mga ganyan. So it's like a lowly kind of job, but you actually get your sueldo, your salary is actually higher than what you would get if you were employed in a more prestigious job in the Philippines. Yeah, something like that. So, for example, it's contradictory kasi you are working in a menial job but you're higher paid. But back in the Philippines, you're middle class, you are educated, but you're employed in a job that doesn't get paid quite well as your menial job abroad. So parang it's contradictory in a sense. Of course, I talked about precarious immigration status and the last one here, the reconstituted filial relations. So what I mean by this is some of the couples, for example, who went there, ang nauna, the first person to go there is the wife. And then later on, when she got more stable job, then she got the husband and the family together. So the husband actually relies on the network of the wife for him to get a job, or maybe he doesn't have a job, so he's depending on the salary of the wife. So this causes a lot, sort of reconstituting the conventional family structure, and it causes certain anxiety with the husbands or with the men members, for example, because of this change in their family structure when they move. Okay, so yun yung sinasabi ko na reconstructive indigeneity. It emphasizes the restorative value that displaced indigenous people can derive from their claim, affirmation, and performance of an identity that characterize us indigenous. So finally, this is the last part of our lecture. So what are the implications of the sort of findings or insights from this project? The first one is that indigeneity or indigenous belonging may have to be understood not only in relation to physical settlement, what we called earlier as territorial attachment, but also in terms of performed social relations that produce a sense of placeness. So this is an attempt to bridge the difference that I discussed earlier between indigeneity, which emphasizes, yung territorial attachment, and diaspora, which of course emphasizes the idea of mobility or travel. Number two, because relations of home and identity have now come to depend on the mediation of new communication technologies, then we may have to understand the notion of an originary and stable home as something which is redefined by or defined by not only the physical location, but a relational network of what we call dialogic interactions, which are done in a cybernetic, mediated by these new communication technologies. Number three, I think this is the second to the last. On the other hand, even if there's a lot of things going on in communication technology, especially in relation to diasporic groups or like the groups in the UK, then it's also important to critically interrogate these communication technologies for both the democratic aspects and constraining relations that they engender. So, for example, you can talk about the idea of access to communication technologies and how that might serve as a constraint for indigenous peoples. And finally, when we analyze the media activities of indigenous people, especially those who are in the diaspora, well, I think there's an important, there's an adequate attention, not only to look at visibility, I mentioned this earlier, but also the possible symptoms of such visibility. So we should not always equate the idea of visibility just because you are visible as an indigenous people, then you are empowered or enfranchised. But there might be, you know, there's a sort of incredulity to that particular kind of skepticism to the automatic value of empowerment with just because you are visible, especially for um, traditional traditionally marginalized groups like indigenous people. So I think that would be it. Maybe we can talk further in the open forum. So uh, thank you very much. And should you want to get in touch with me for this further conversation on this project, you can send me an email. So thank you very much. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Ruth. Okay, so we still have about maybe 8 to 10 minutes, no, for Q&A. But maybe just give me a minute to not to summarize definitely, but maybe just to highlight some of my take-home points from your presentation. So I think we are really so grateful, no, for the sharing that you presented today. I think it has inspired us, no, to look at indigeneity, as you said, no, in the contemporary world, no, beyond what what perhaps the usual notion of how we should study indigenous peoples, or how we should understand indigenous peoples, right? So I think also based on the presentation, you have inspired us as well to look into the methodological creative ways of doing a study such as this, by highlighting, for example, what you said earlier about double-ended study, no? So, and this is quite interesting and unique at the same time when we look at diasporic indigenous peoples. You were also able to, of course, showcase, no, the way to interpret, to make meaning of these experiences. You mentioned social semiotics as well as intertextual reading as important mechanisms of making sense, no, of these experiences of diasporic indigenous peoples, right? And I think we also would like to, of course, highlight, no, how you made sense of these experiences by looking at prosthetic biography, no, and I think that's something, I think the metaphors that you showcase as well, and also this particular use of the term prosthetic biography, no, and how in fact our sense of who we are, our identity, whether or not we are IPs, for instance, no, I think what's interesting there is that you have re I think affirmed, and I suppose affirmed the idea that our sense of who we are, our sense of identity, is really a process and should always be taken into a context, no, particularly within the context of time and space. Yeah, no. So, and so with that, no, I think maybe we can hear from our audience if they have questions or clarifications. And I saw one already, no? Maybe we can start with this quite practical question, but let me just from Bethany, am I correct? From Bethany Wo. Salamat for your talk. I think there's one question, but it has been answered. Okay, Prof. Ruth has answered your question. So is that okay? So we'll just skip that part. So from Bethany, are you involved in any current projects involving Indigenous peoples living in diaspora?
Okay. At the moment, yes. Parang it's a continuing work with them because, of course, I mean, you'd assume that I've developed some strong friendships with the community because of the stay there and the project that I've worked with them. So we're working on parang mga book projects, like writing the narratives of diasporic Igorots in not only in the UK but in like Europe. So we've actually came out with one volume already, like really like parang life stories or parang ganon, encouraging them to write down the stories, their life stories, their experiences in their country of destination. And now we're working on a second volume of that. So I think that there was a lot of interest after the publication of the first one, in partnership with the organization in the Netherlands. So they published that. So we're working on that, a second volume of parang, I think the title is Travails and Triumphs of Igorots in Europe, something like that. Yeah, so it's a literary attempt, yeah, like an attempt to put together these literary productions of the yeah, the migrants there, so that they are parang there's a voice, you can hear them telling their own stories rather than other people like me talking about their stories. Yeah, so that's the project that's going on now. And perhaps there are further projects in the future. I was thinking about uh, doing a project in relation to the relevance or the salience of religious practice. And but I know if that's going to prosper. Let's see in the future.
Right. Thank you, Prof. Ruth. Do we have other questions? You can also let's check. All right. We have one question here from Ruan. Okay. Um, Let me just read. My main takeaways are location as performed, performativity, and that two, even the idea of representation or appearance is deconstructed from its previously given association with empowerment. Showing oneself does not immediately mean empowerment. All right. So it's really more of I suppose an affirmation, take home point from the paper, from the presentation. Okay. Jelai, you're raising your hand. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, thank you very much. And I really enjoyed the talk. It's fantastic, the concepts, the methods. And by the way, I'm in Brussels, so good morning, Prof. Tindaan. I actually read your article on the book Travels, Triumphs, and Travails of Igorot in Europe, and I noticed the how active the Igorot community is in Europe in general, in the UK, of course, and the Netherlands, as you mentioned. But I'm also wondering about the generational differences in terms of, reconstructing their indigeneity, because, of course, when we talk of migration and Igorot diaspora, we speak of different generations. You have the first generation, second generation, and third generation of Igorot, and how different are they? I mean, how different are their ways of reinventing traditions? How different are these second generation Igorots in terms of um, performing through the performances, how they make sense of the material culture that they bring here in Europe. And I think I have other questions, but I think that's the one thing that I want to know, because I think your presentation is very rich. And I am also wondering what are your current publications so that we can learn more about your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Jelai. Yeah, good morning. What's the difference dun sa generation? So in the case of the UK, for example, because you're right, the first, parang they call them the elders. So these are the first generations, those who arrive in mga 1960s, 70s through the healthcare service stream. And then the others came later as, for example, through student visas. They There's this stream, diba, of students going to the UK, and then you study, for example, a particular course, and that becomes a pathway for you to become permanent resident. And of course, it's different for those who were really born there. Of course, they're now speaking English as their. It's very. I mean, parang ano to, when you see this particular children, and they, of course, you think, oh, these are children from home, and then when they speak English, they're really L1, first language British English. So it's fascinating. I think that the main difference is that for the younger generation, or at least these are the things that came up when I talked to them. I had this chance to also have little chats and longer chats in different activities, and they're saying that for them, the idea of this affirmation of culture or representing themselves and making sense of the material culture is something which is more vicarious. It is now, of course, because they didn't have the sort of immersion in the culture or the experience in the home which the first generation would have had. So the first generation, they really the memories of the rituals, so the idea of remaking them in UK is very, very strong. But for the second generation who didn't go through those experiences, this parang there's a sort of I don't, maybe sort of detachment, or parang they're looking at this as what their parents are doing, but what would be the relevance of this to me? Of course my parents are explaining that this is why it's important, but because you didn't go through the experience itself, you're looking at it as a sort of vicarious experience, which you are participating because you're part of the community. On the other hand, the other response to that is because they didn't go through the experience, they're actually much more interested, more driven, more passionate to discover about it. Kasi nga, they didn't have the experience. So they actually organize mga like trips na to come home, ganyan, so that they can experience, or they organize these activities like they want so much to speak the language, like they want to speak Ibaloy, ganyan. So what they do is they organize language classes in order for them and for their own children to actually learn the language of their parents, because they feel like that is one important pathway for them to actually not only appreciate but be part of that particular experience of their culture. So there parang various responses, it depends. I don't know in how they are looking at it. The other thing is some of the younger generations, they're saying they have lesser dispensable income to be indulging in the representation, in the conduct of all these festivals compared to their parents. So parang now the idea of them doing the performances, for example, parang that becomes a constraint now. They are not as probably as active, as let's say flamboyant, as as passionate because of this sort of limitations that they experience in the performance itself. So yeah, they're looking at that as a particular kind of challenge. Did I answer your question adequately?
Yes, yes, it's very insightful. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Prof. Ruth, maybe we can entertain one last question before we end our webinar. It's also there in the Q&A from Ibrash Pasha. What do you suggest? Can non-Indigenous researcher conduct research with Indigenous peoples? Okay, so would you like to respond to that?
Yes. So the Pasha, I think the question is if you're a non-Indigenous and how do you study an Indigenous group, something like that.
Or maybe can if Ibrash, would you like to unmute and clarify the question? Or maybe okay, Ibrash.
Yeah. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Um, yes, yes. I am a non-indigenous person and want to conduct a research on Kuchi indigenous people in Pakistan, Afghanistan area. So I was asking that is there any issue if a non-indigenous person conduct research with the indigenous people?
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Of course, the idea of parang you are part of the community, and if you are not, would sometimes we think there are particular challenges there. But I just want to answer your question first by saying, uh, the one of the foremost scholars in indigenous studies, like Linda Tuhiwai Smith, she's from the New Zealand Maori scholar, and she talks about this, the idea of insider outsider. The idea that uh, somebody who is a member of her community, like herself, would study her own community, and the sort of conventional wisdom there is if you are an insider, you have more insight perhaps, or you have better inclination in terms of understanding or the practices of your community. And which is says yes, of course, because for example, you have access to the language, you have connections to the community, so it facilitates your entry into the community to do your research, for example. However, she also says something like, there are also ways in which an insider can be an outsider in her or his own community. And she gives this example of her going to the homes of her research participants to, of course, interview that to interact with them. But she noticed that they're actually every time she goes to their home, they're actually cleaning their house. They're tidying up, so they're cleaning their. Parang it should be a tidy place before she come out because she's coming. And she says that when people do that, they actually are treating you as a guest. You are a guest. You are not a member of their community because they are not okay presenting their home in the way it is. They have to clean it up just like when you receive a guest in your house. So I think what I'm saying is that it's not automatic that when you are an insider, you're better disposed to study your community, because as Tuhiwai Smith, illustrates in this story of hers, there are also those kinds of limitations. And of course, she was being treated as a guest or as like an outsider because she thinks because of her position, she's an academic, she has a salary, she has a car. So they're seeing her as somebody who is different from them. She does not belong to their community. And I think I have a similar experience there when I did my project as well, because of course they knew that I had funding to go to the study to do PhD studies. So I didn't have the same pressures in terms of having to be employed to sustain myself and my studies while I was there. So that's a particular kind of also an outsider quality to the community. Yeah, so I think it does not really, or that's my opinion, it doesn't really depend on whether you are an insider or outsider. There are advantages, disadvantages for both position. But I think the more important thing is that we engage in the rigors of scholarship. Like, we are careful about our methods, our ethics, that we don't harm the community, things like that. That we do our data gathering in an ethical manner. We disseminate our findings in ethical ways, or in consultation with the community. We respect their practices. So it's the rigor of the scholarship, really, that's very important. And perhaps if you're engaging in Indigenous studies, it's the commitment to the aims of Indigenous studies and the commitment to promoting the welfare of Indigenous people. So I think that's my very vague, sort of ambiguous answer to your question.
All right. Okay, so thank you. There's also a request here, Dr. Ruth, if you can please share your email address again. Okay, so it would if it's okay with you, you can type it already in the chat box. Right. Thank you. All right. Okay, so it's already 3:10, and of course, we also are I know that maybe some of you still have questions, but of course we're constrained by time. So, but before we go, of course, we want to formally thank our speaker today. Of course, so let me just share my screen. Okay, one moment. Right. Okay. So, of course, Dr. Ruth, you know how thankful we are for having you this afternoon. So we would like to present this certificate of appreciation to you in grateful acknowledgement for your role as speaker for the public lecture titled Mobilizing Indigeneity and Diaspora, held as part of the Indigenous Studies Lecture Series and in celebration of Indigenous Peoples Month. So thank you so much, Dr. Ruth, and I'm sure that people here, are really happy to hear your study, and I think they're actually looking forward to having more. So if you could also send us maybe a copy, or I don't know, a link to the publication that you have that's related to
Oh,
the topic today, that would also be great.
oh
Yeah.
yeah.
So thank you so much, Dr. Ruth, and um, I hope we'll have more of these dialogues in the future.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for your time.
Yes,
If you're
thank you.
interested with the publication, can you send me an email and then I'll send the PDF to you
All right.
if you're interested to read that. Also,
That's great.
my dissertation, the entire dissertation is you can access it online. Yeah, made available by my university.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Ruth. In fact, I'm thinking already for one of our GEs. I don't know if you've already required it in one of your GEs, but I think this is a very appropriate reading material for our SAS1 students in UP Baguio. So particularly we talk about the process and context of selfhood. So I think that's very much connected, this particular
Uh,
study. Mm-mm.
okay, I'll send you a copy as well.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much. All right,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank
Good
you so much.
afternoon. Bye bye.
Bye. For those who are still here, the link to the evaluation form is available in the chat box. So please, if you have time to do the evaluation, please do so. Thank you. All right.